I'm glad you guys could join us. And we're excited. I have just a couple announcements. The doors will be locking at 7:15, so you're spending the night. Thank you. No, it just means if you run out to your car, make sure somebody knows you're out there, but you can't get back in. Okay, just a forewarning. We're going to ask that you purchase your books before 8:15, so we can close out the registers by 8:30, and we're actually going to kick you out at 9 o'clock. So, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I gotta go to bed. I gotta work tomorrow. But we are so glad to have Erin joining us again tonight. How many here have read her book already? Not this one. Okay, but you read some. Okay, good. Oh, those that haven't, by the way, you're in for a treat. It's really good. I really enjoyed it. So, you know, it's fun when you can introduce somebody that you kind of sort of work with, even though it's in a different part of the company. So that makes that fun. It's also because she writes about Michigan, which I have to admit, I love books about Michigan, my favorite state. So, but we're going to hear all about it, and hopefully she won't give any of the secrets away about the book. So.
I don't intend to.
So thank you for joining us tonight, Erin.
Thank you. Maya. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for leaving your house, coming here and being here in real life. It's so great to be in person with people. I'm going to talk a little bit about my new book today. I'm just realizing I don't have a copy. Chris, if you have a copy, that would be great. That's one thing I didn't bring. And I'm going to read from it a little bit, but not too much. Thank you. But before we get into the book, I wanted to point out something that's up here. You might recognize a version of this picture is the cover art for the book. We changed the color a little bit. When I posted about the cover of the book, the artist who took that picture contacted me and said, "Oh, that's my picture. Are you having a launch event? I would love to print a couple limited edition prints, one for you and one for somebody at your event." And she signed it, and this is one of only two. And then I signed the other corner. And I said, "That's really, really generous of you to do that." And she said, "Well, it's easier if I print them here." And she's from the Netherlands. I neglected to say that. It's easier if I print them here, and then you can sign when it gets to you, and then you can put them in a frame. And I said, "Okay." So I went to Michael's, and I was looking at all these frames. And I said, "Well, what size is this going to be?" And I said, "There's lots of frames of this particular size to choose from." And she's like, "No, no, no. I want it bigger." It is humongous. So think about that before you put your name in. You have to have a wall that this will fit on, but it is one of only two in the world, and I have the other one in my house. So if it's something that you love, she's got a really great sensibility. She also is on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram, definitely look her up. Her name is Eva Van Oosten, and there's some information about her on this poster. That's her, not me. In case there was any question. Some people think that looks a little bit like me. Some people don't think it looks like me. All right, so before we do the book signing, or I guess when I go back there, as long as you get your, no, you gotta get your name in first, because I'm pulling the names before I get back there and do book signing. So just remember that. And yeah, Becky, that would be great if you could just pass some of those out and fill out your information, and then she can put it in the little fishbowl for you. Okay, so let's get to it. The Girl Who Could Breathe Underwater is what we're here for. At least it's what I'm here for. Maybe you wandered in and you didn't realize this was going to be happening, and you didn't know that you were going to be locked into the store. It's the story of Kendra Brennan, who is a young novelist whose first book was a fictionalized version of her own life. It was published to good sales and good reviews, but Kendra is stymied as she tries to write her next book because of an anonymous letter from a very disappointed reader. Who signs it? Very disappointed reader. And I know there are some other writers in here, and they can relate to getting a review like that. And this person accuses her of using people for her own gain, of getting the story wrong, of taking the wrong person's side in the story. And so Kendra is compelled to return to the scene of the crime, as it were, to discover for herself whether or not she told the story accurately, whether or not she told the truth. Because as we all know, the best fiction does tell truth, even though it's fiction, even though it's made up. And of course, the truth is going to be a little more complicated than Kendra realized. But before I read from the first chapter, I wanted to tell you about the time I almost drowned. When I was about 4 years old, I decided that I knew how to swim. We were at our neighbor's pool. We lived on a court, and then there was another court, and they lived on the other court. We were at their pool, and my sister, who's older, had just jumped into the water without her floaties. Now, everybody calls them water wings now. I don't know where that came from. When I was coming up, they were floaties, the little things on your arms. And if she was going to do something, I was going to do something. I didn't realize that she actually knew how to swim. I just thought, she's doing it, oh, I can do that. So I jumped in, and the next thing I remember is looking up at my own breath, just sort of leaving, fluttering up to the surface. And because I had just sunk like a stone into the bottom of the pool. And then the next thing I remember seeing is a woman in a dark bathing suit diving in. It wasn't my mother, because she doesn't swim. It was somebody else there that day. Don't know who. That's all I remember. But here I am, I'm drowned. So all's well that ends well. I'm happy to report that that formative experience with swimming, you might think that would keep me from the water. That might have been a very scary thing. I might never have gotten into the water again, but it didn't sour me to swimming. I actually became an extremely strong swimmer. I was a synchronized swimmer with that girl over there. And her mom was our coach. And I also spent a week on the high school swim team, where as a freshman, I beat everyone else at the first timed race, and so nobody liked me. All of the juniors and seniors who were already sort of mean girls, they didn't really care for me that much. And I didn't quit just because they were cold to me, which is a really nice way of saying what they were. But I quit mostly because swim practice was boring. It was so boring, just staring at the bottom of the pool. And then I married somebody who's a swimmer, and he's probably thinking, it's not boring, it's very exciting. But the point is, it didn't keep me from swimming. I had a very negative experience, almost drowning, which pushed me to excel as a swimmer. Well, a good experience, winning a race, pushed me to quit the team. So you never can tell what those experiences as kids are going to amount to later on. Almost drowning could have turned me into someone who feared water specifically, or even more generally, somebody who thought, I can't do things. I tried this and I couldn't do it. And I know a lot of people who have that as part of their experience. I don't know, there are a lot of people, and maybe there's some here, who assume if something doesn't come easily, it's something that they weren't meant to do. I'm not athletic. I'm not artistic. I'm not musical. I'm not creative. I can't even write a letter. I actually had somebody tell me once, I can't even write a letter. I feel like you probably can write a letter. Like, that's really selling yourself short. But the thing about painful childhood experiences is that we can let them color our vision of ourselves and what we're capable of. So you might have a bad experience, and that sticks with you closer than the good experiences, I feel like, growing up, or at least it has in my life, because you've forgotten more pleasant moments in your life than you can imagine. But you remember when you were embarrassed, and you remember when you felt like a failure, and you remember when you weren't picked for the team, or you were picked last. You remember when you were underestimated. Those are all things that, like, you can immediately conjure up that memory. But you can't conjure up every nice sunset you saw, and every time you have a general memory of like what summer as a kid was like, right? It's not all specific memories. So my bad experience at my neighbor's pool, where I thought I could do something and was immediately shown in no uncertain terms that I could not, didn't turn me into an adult that didn't try new things because I assumed I couldn't do them. In fact, it had kind of the opposite effect. I generally assume if I see something that's interesting to do, oh, I could learn how to do that. And then if it's interesting enough, you go about trying to learn how to do it. That's how you write a book. Nobody's born writing books, and it takes a lot of practice. But it's the failures that we learn from, not the victories. It's those things that make us into the person we are and form our character, more so than the things that are good in life, I feel. It's getting hit in the face with a baseball that gets you to keep your glove up. It's when you sing a cringingly flat note that makes you try harder next time so that you get the real applause instead of the pity applause, you know, that feels bad. And it's the almost drowning that makes us want to conquer the water. At least that's how it's been for me. Now, on your seats, you may have noticed there are a few things. One of those things is a little bag that has little rocks in it. Those are chocolate rocks. You can eat them. Maybe some of you already have. I'm a compulsive rock collector. If I go to the beach, I'll look at the water, I'll look at the sunset, the trees, the eagle flying by, but I spend just as much time kind of like sort of wandering around like this because I'm always looking for rocks. My son is laughing because I guess you know that's true. We spend a lot of time together up at Lake Louise at camp, and I look for rocks, and I have a lot of rocks at home. I don't need any of these rocks, nobody does. But I have so many big, like those big pickle jars that you get for church, for funerals, like the big ones. Those are all filled with rocks at my house because I can't stop picking them up, bringing them home, washing them up and putting them in jars. And that's a proclivity I have given to Kendra in the story. She collects rocks and rocks and more rocks, even though she already has plenty and doesn't need any of them. And rocks are hard things, right? I have a rock right here. It's a gray rock. It's pretty ordinary. It would be prettier if it was wet. All of you have been to the beach, you know this, that wet rocks are always prettier. It'd be prettier if I polished it all up. But I haven't done that. However, when you think about the rocks that you find at the beach that are jagged, eventually they're going to be sanded down, right? The waves, the frost, and the thaw, that eventually creates these sort of rounded rocks more like this. And if you work on a rock enough, you can make it really smooth and shiny. And to me, I kind of think of that as like those hard things in our lives. If you put it away and ignore it, and you just sort of let the dust settle on it, you're never going to wear away those rough edges. It's being handled and being kind of moved about that gets those rough edges out. And when you think about negative things that have happened in your life, those are things where if you ignore them, you never grow from them, and you never deal with them, you never heal from them, if you just kind of shove it all down inside. We have to kind of work through the stuff that's happened to us. And if you haven't already thought of your own painful memory, that being left out, being chosen last, being told you can't do this, or you're not good enough for that, ask yourself in your mind right now if you have one of those. And if you do, think about whether you've taken that hard thing and tried to ignore it, or if you've tried to deal with it. Have you been able to learn or get through it, grow through it? Has any part of it made you a better, stronger, more compassionate person? I feel like a lot of times it's those terrible things that happen in our lives that make us able to help other people with those terrible things. And in The Girl Could Breathe Underwater, Kendra's going to face some of those hard things in her past. And she's on a mission to prove herself that she's right about what happened. But in the process, she's going to learn a lot about herself, not just about the event itself, what happened, the thing that she wrote about in her first book. She's going to learn things about herself, her friends, her family, and her enemies. And all of that is going to put her problems in a different light. She's going to dig out that rock of pain and shame and blame, and she's going to learn about herself and move forward, unburdened, which is such a nice way to feel when you have something that you're trying to work through. So I'm going to say that you can eat your rocks if you like, and there's plenty if you want to eat some and bring some home. But if you bring that little bag home, put it somewhere where you'll see it, maybe it'll remind you to kind of turn those things over in your mind, those things that have happened to you, and try to get through them. I think one of the best parts of life is when you can take a negative thing and turn it into something positive. And we don't want to waste our pain by settling into the mindset of the victim forever, or the loser, or the failure, or whatever it is. God refines us through those situations, but we can't be refined if we're not willing to go through it, kind of get through it. That's kind of what Kendra's going to do. She's going to move through it. But a character can't grow unless she starts in a certain place. And so I'm going to read to you from the very beginning of the book where Kendra is kind of starting. And how many people did you say said that they've already read it? Okay, parts of it, some of it, all of it. I'm going to say before I forget, when we get to the Q&A portion, you will be kicked out into the cold summarily if you give away any spoilers. So if you have any plot-specific questions, don't ask them. Email me. I'm really easy to find. Just keep in mind that a lot of people haven't read it yet. So let me read to you from the first chapter in Kendras Voice. The summer you chopped off all your hair, I asked your dad what the point of being a novelist was. He said it was to tell the truth. Ridiculous. Nothing you write is real, I said. You tell stories about made-up people with made-up problems. You're a professional liar. Oh, Kendra, he said. You know better than that. And he started typing again, as if that had settled things, as if telling me I already had the answer was any kind of answer at all. I don't know why he assumed I knew anything. I've been wrong about so much, especially you. But there is one thing about which I am now certain. I was lying to myself about why I decided to finally return to Hidden Lake, which makes perfect sense in hindsight. After all, novelists are liars. It will be a quiet place to work without distraction, I told my agent. No internet, no cell service, just me and the lake and a landline for emergencies. But what about emailing with me and Paula, Lois said, practicality being one of the reasons I had signed with her 3 years prior. I know you need to get down to it if you're going to meet your deadline, but you need to be reachable. I can go into town every week and use the Wi-Fi at the coffee shop, I said, sure that this concession would satisfy her. And what about the German edition? The translator needs swift responses from you to stay on schedule. We emailed back and forth a bit until Lois could see that I was not to be dissuaded. That if I was going to meet my deadline, I needed to see a lake outside my window instead of the rusting roof of my apartment building's carport. Of course, that wasn't the real reason. I see that now. The email came from your mother in early May about the time the narcissus were wilting. For her to initiate any kind of communication with me was so bizarre, I was sure that something must be wrong even before I read the message. Kendra, I'm sorry we didn't get to your grandfather's funeral. We've been out of state. Anyway, please let me know if you've seen or heard from Cammie lately or if she has a new number. Thanks, Beth Rainier. It was apparent she didn't know that you and I hadn't talked in 8 years, that you had never told your mother about the fight we'd had, the things we'd said to each other, the ambiguous state in which we left our friendship. And now a woman who only talked to me when necessary was reaching out, wondering if I knew how to get in touch with you. That was the day I started planning my return to the intoxicating place where I had spent every half-naked summer of my youth, because I was sure that in order to recover you, I needed to recover us. So you can see that there's a different type of narration in this where she's actually addressing a person in the book, which takes a little getting used to if you haven't started reading it yet. But you'll see why later. I actually wrote this book originally in third person and then realized I needed to have more of a particular character in the book who wasn't there a lot. So I thought that was a way that I could connect with that character where she's actually talking to another character. So I hope that's enough to give you a little bit of a feel of the type of the reading or the type of the writing, and so that you want to buy copies for yourself and for all your friends. And I did want to open things up to questions before we pull the raffle winner. Oh, in fact, there's lots of little guys in there. I was thinking this was so big, nobody's going to have room for this in their house. Nobody's going to put their name in. But that's great. Good for Eva. Don't forget to follow her on Instagram. Just look up Eva Van Hoesten. And you're all Dutch over here. You know how to spell that. Again, before we do the Q&A, make sure that you're not asking about anything plot related. So here's what's open to you. You may ask about writing, about what I'm writing next, about other books that I've written, but not this one, unless it's general questions. And you'll notice, especially that I didn't, if you've read it, you'll notice that I did not touch on particular themes, and that was purposeful because of mixed company and different ages of people here. So keep that in mind as you ask your questions, if that makes sense. Does anybody have any questions about within the strictures that I've given you? Yes, Jean.
Oh, a microphone.
Yeah, you got to
Great.
speak into the mic.
So you already answered my question. I've been dying to email you the question about the second person style of writing, that it's not very common. So I feel you answered that in a satisfactory manner already.
All right.
So luckily I had 2 questions.
Excellent.
So when I read the book, well, not giving anything away, I felt like there was such a familiarity with the grandfather's cabin. So where did that come from? Is it a made up place? Is it something that you're familiar with?
Sure. Very good. Good question.
Good question.
Well
Say-
asked.
you did good, Jean.
And I think I'll also talk a little bit about the setting in general, not just the cabin. So you guys are all from Michigan. I'm assuming nobody came from out of state for this. So how many of you have summered on a lake? Okay, quite a few of you. How many of you have at least visited a lake?
Yeah, visited.
Okay, some of you, all of you. That's good. It's good to see. Now, I know the answer to this. There's at least one person in here who is not a swimmer. Is anybody else not a swimmer? I know it's you. You're not either. All right. Oh, we have a few of them. All right. It's okay. It's okay. But I think that a lot of people ask about the lake in general. Is it based on a real lake? And since we all know a lot of lakes, I'll say that when let's see, gosh, when did I start going up there? 18? My husband has been going up to this camp on Thumb Lake, which is near Gaylord, called Lake Louise. And then I started going there. My son has been there every year since he was 5 weeks old. So the lake itself is kind of based on that lake, except there's no camps. So that, in my mind, when I see in my mind this lake, Hidden Lake, it's Thumb Lake, but with no camps and no public access. Those public people out there, all private, because it's a really closed community. It's a small community. But the cabin itself, the specifics of the cabin, I don't think are based on a real place. However, the cottage across the lake that she spends time in, the Rainier's cottage, in my mind looks a lot like our friend Tina's cottage on Lake Huron in Caseville. So I did have in my mind a real place when I was thinking about the layout of that house. So that's a good question. Yeah.
Because I've never grown up anyway, but I was wondering about devices. Like the first book of yours that I read was The Words Between Us.
Okay.
And like the poetry for each of the books that she read was sort of specific to that book.
Yeah.
And then I know that you're writing songs for one of your next books.
Yes.
So what do you do?
Oh, was there any like sort of special?
Can you repeat what you said?
She was asking about if there were any particular devices within this book that were particular to this one, such as the poetry in The Words Between Us, or in the book that I'm writing, or the next book that's coming out that has to do with music. I've been writing songs, so stuff like that. Gosh, I don't know. I don't feel like there are. And actually, when I think about it, my third book, All That We Carry, also had sort of like there's these little vignettes of the past. What's different, I guess, about this book is that it is, because of the narration style, where you have somebody directly addressing a character. I guess what's unique about this one is that because those two people know each other really well, there are certain things that the narrator just wouldn't say because she knows that this other person knows it. So you as the reader don't get to know it. So there's a lot withheld, I guess, in this book rather than presented. And those are always, to me, the books that I like to read are the ones that make you just work a little bit harder and make you wait a little bit for all of the information. There's little more annoying to me when you're like watching a movie or reading a book and you can tell like, okay, they needed this information. So here's the exposition scene. And with a book like this, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can't say because obviously these two people both know that, so why would she say it? So I guess there's not a particular device like the songs or the poetry. It's more like holding back. That's a great question. Have you ever had any question like that before? Yeah. She's coming to you. You got it.
I can get warmed up. How long have you been working on this particular novel?
Oh, excellent question. This particular novel. There's like 3 answers to that question.
I want them all.
You want it all? Okay. I started writing the first scene that I wrote, not the first scene that's in here, not what I just read to you, of this book in 2015 when I was at my writing retreat in Albuquerque that I've gone to a number of years. I was on the patio at the hotel and I just started writing it. And that was, there was a reason I started writing it then. It had to do with some of the things in my own life, relationships with people where something just kind of kicked that into gear. Like, okay, it's time to write this story. But I also started writing a story with some of the similar themes and in fact set in the same place, some of the same characters back in 2010, maybe a little earlier than that. And the reason I started writing that, when I decided I'm going to write novels, that was the first one, and that became the drawer novel. That was something that I emailed a bunch of people, including some people in this room. I know I emailed Michelle, like, I finished something. I finished a novel. Isn't this exciting? And they were like, great. But that became the novel that you finish as a practice, but it isn't really what you want to start with, or what it really wasn't the story. So actually, somebody had asked in another context, I think in a podcast, had asked about 2 of the secondary characters. The Kendra's mother and her mentor. So they seemed like like there was something more there. They were really well developed. And in fact, the first book that I wrote in 2010 was their story more. So in my mind, I have all sorts of things that I haven't revealed in this, but it is kind of the background of their story. But there was something even before that. So a lot of the themes in this book and some of the actual scenes come from my own experiences as a child. And so I've been thinking about the themes in this book and some of the things that happen in this book for more than 30 years. So that's a complicated answer to what seems like it would be a straightforward question. But yeah, so I had this book written before I published anything else. And I've just been kind of working on it and honing it ever since. And I'm really, really happy with how it ended up. And I'm really, really glad the first iteration didn't go anywhere.
Since you mentioned it, will you tell us more about your next book that you're working on?
I absolutely will. I will tell you about that. I'm really excited about the next book. In fact, I turned it in already, and my editor's just walking away with her small child. But I already gave it to her. There she is. And I had so much fun writing that book. This one it wasn't unfun to write, even though a lot of the themes are kind of heavier. It was actually very satisfying to write, but it wasn't super fun. This next one is fun. It is, I guess I'll tell you guys the working title. The working title is Deep Cut. That will not be the title, I'm sure. And I see my marking lead. Yeah, that's not the title. But in the sense of like a song that's a deep cut off of an album. Okay, so you know it's going to be about musicians. And it's the story of a young man who has been kicked out of his band and kicked out of his apartment that he shared with his bandmates. And he is now living with his loser uncle in his uncle's trailer, which was really just the break trailer for the construction crew that built this giant contemporary, like 1970s contemporary house across the street. And, you know, the long-suffering landlords have sort of had pity on him and they let him stay in this place. There's a whole story about that. But he's living with his uncle and he takes an invitation meant for his uncle because they have the same name and goes to this New Year's Eve party at this house where a guitarist turned producer and his singer-songwriter 1960s wife live with their daughter. And so it's going to be the story of this young man, Michael, and the daughter, Natalie, and how their lives are changing and how they're coming together to form a band. So it's all about music. And I grew up in a household where music was really, really, like it was really important, and it still is. My dad's an audiophile. A lot of people don't know what that word means. It means that he spends all of his extra money and time on high-end stereo. So it also means that you can't just like give the man a CD or a record because if it's not recorded the best, he'll point that out, be like, well, you know, I bet these people are really good live, but this isn't a great recording. So it's a, you know, there's good and bad. But growing up, like listening to music was an event. You didn't have it just on in the background of your life. It was a thing you did. You sat down and listened. And my dad would come home from work and he would make a drink and he would sit down and he would listen with his eyes closed. And we were allowed to be in the room if we made no noise. There was no playing, there was no talking. You could be there, but you had to seem like you weren't there. So it was really, really fun to like kind of to spend some time in the world of like people to whom music is really, really important. And as I was writing this book, years and years ago when my son was tiny, I wanted to start learning guitar. So I took some lessons and my husband bought me a guitar and I sort of fumbled along and I can do some things, but I would never call myself a guitarist. But I wanted to write songs to go along with the book because of course it's a band. They're going to be writing songs. And that's kind of the poetry of it, right? Yeah. But then I said to my husband, gosh, it'd be really nice if you could help me write these into actual songs. He's like, I think you could do that. I'm like, no, I don't think I can. I don't know anything about it. And then I just sort of stumbled along and I'm sort of terrified that like the melodies I've come up with are really somebody else's melodies that are just sort of in there because I don't know anything about it. But it's been super, super, super fun. And it's set in, the New Year's party is going from 1989 to 1990. So it's all set in 1990, which was such a fun time to set it, considering like just how complicated the world is right now. Because I don't know if you remember this, but when that changeover was happening, everybody was really hopeful. And things were going great. And the Berlin Wall was coming down and the USSR was going to be democracy soon. And, you know, all of these great things were happening. And by the end of the year, it all fell apart because like the Gulf War started. And but for a while there, it felt really hopeful. And it was just really nice to be in that place for a while. So that's a long answer to what's the next book about.
And yeah, a question from those watching online.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite lake? And they want to know, especially if it's one of the Great Lakes.
Oh, yes. Yes. My favorite Great Lake is Lake Superior. It's in the name. It is the far superior lake. I love it so much. I just love the landscape up there. It's just so different from the lakes down here. Now, I grew up in Bay City, which is on the Lake Huron side, and I certainly enjoyed tons of time at Lake Huron because of my dear friend who had a cottage. Well, I got to go to her cottage all the time. And I spent time living in Grand Rapids, so I spent time on Lake Michigan, which is certainly the best for sunsets, right? You don't get great sunsets on Lake Huron. Certainly the best for warmth of water. Most years, some years it's inexplicably cold, depending on like how the currents go. But for my money, Lake Superior is definitely the best lake because of the landscape and the fact that there's not as many people. Black flies could do without, but they're not always there. And you can get way better rocks up there than most of the lakes down here. Now, the interesting thing is the little gray rock that I have up here is actually a Petoskey stone. And the only Petoskey stones I've ever found were actually at the lake that this is based on. It's not in Petoskey. But what I understand is when they were building a new part of the camp, they brought in a bunch of fill. And so that's how the Petoskey stones got there. And so the only Petoskey stones I've ever found have been at camp. Far from Petoskey, not too far from Petoskey, but I've never actually found one on a beach, which seems like I'm sort of cheating. I'm just sort of digging it out of the ground near a cabin at camp. But oh well. But that's a great question. And I think the favorite inland lake, of course, would be Fun Lake, because that's what I've spent the most time on. Any other questions? Should I pick a name from the bowl?
Sure.
All right. Let's see who's going to bring this home. Hopefully you don't have a bunch of stuff in your trunk, because this is a very large piece of art. That one right here. Kristen DeHaan. Oh, well, giant print. You knew you were putting in for it, right? You didn't think this was something else? Okay, awesome. Well, congratulations. You can certainly take that home with you. Enter to win. Oh, there's like a space stand on that. That's fun. I'm so excited. I'm so excited that you're going to take that home. It's been in my house for a while. I had to move it in order to get into my file drawers. If you didn't win it, which is everybody but Kristen, but you still want a print of some sort. The other thing that Eva sent me from the Netherlands was a bunch of smaller like flyers for the event. Now they had the wrong date because of course this was supposed to be on the 6th, but they are smaller and I have a silver pen that I can sign with if you want. I'll have those with me back there. There are 6 of them. So you can fight over them. Okay, were there any other questions that anybody wanted to ask before we do book signings and stuff like that? If you brought a book, I could, oh yeah, go ahead. Can you show?
I can try.
You can shout, you can do it.
This is actually the question that I asked you, I don't know, by messenger or something a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, and I told you to ask it here, but I don't remember what the question is now.
So what I wanted to know was, I've been through college, I have a doctorate, but not anything to do with writing.
Oh, right, yes.
But I'd like to become a writer, and I write scientific writing because I write charts every day, and I edit my own charts, and I edit other people's charts, but I don't actually have the composition background. So,
right.
Is there something that I should do class-wise, or try to work on a degree? And if so, what would you suggest?
Right, and the reason I wanted you to ask me here is because I have follow-up questions. What kind of writing do you want to do? Do you want to do fiction?
Yes.
Yes, okay. That colors my answer. So some people would wonder, do I need to go back to school? Do I need to get an MFA or something like that? I would say no, you don't have to do that. You could do that if that was the type of writing you wanted to do, but that's a very particular type of writing. Usually it's going to be more literary writing. And if you wanted to write something that was more commercial or more genre focused, like if you wanted to write sci-fi or romance or historical fiction or something like that, you really don't have to go to a formal writing program for that. So my background is I'm an English major. We don't actually learn how to write a novel, even though all you do is read novels and talk about them. You never learn how to write them. So I wouldn't go to school for English, for sure. If you wanted to take some creative writing courses, that probably would be helpful. But a lot of times what you can do is you take like workshops. A lot of things now are online because of course people aren't going anywhere. So there's a lot of things that you can do online for very little money that would be something where you can explore a certain idea or have somebody help you develop an idea or just learn some of the basics of the trade. And once conferences and stuff start coming up again, that might be something that you want to invest in to learn. Just like if you were going back to college, you would spend money. You should expect to spend some money on training, but I wouldn't say that you had to go to college for it. for sure. Most of the writers I know probably didn't go to college for that. You said you're a veterinarian, so you have all sorts of life experience from which you can draw to tell a story. And even when I started writing novels, like the one that I said I didn't publish, this is the drawer novel, like I was always a good writer. That's why I went into English, because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading, I enjoyed writing, but being a good writer doesn't necessarily mean you can tell a story. So it's like you have to learn how to do that particular skill is I think the main thing when if you want to write a novel that's, 80,000 words, how do you do that? Like, how do you get through the whole thing? Gosh, it's getting really boring. What am I doing wrong? And so I think that workshops and actually joining a writing organization where you can work with other writers and you can exchange things and critique each other's things, as long as it's a healthy critique group, and there are bad ones. I think that's a much better way to go than going back to school when you already have a PhD in something, unless you really love academia, which I totally get, and I kind of wouldn't mind having an MFA myself. So great question. I'm glad you asked that. I totally forgot about that. Okay, well, if there's no others, I know that we have a limited amount of time that we're allowed to be in the building. So if you haven't bought your books, you're going to want to do that. I also have other books somewhere. I'm sure there's a table somewhere that has books. So if you have read this, but you haven't read my other books, you can purchase those today. Or you can just think, gosh, who in my life would love these books? And you can buy multiple copies. And I'll sign all of them. It's no problem. All right, well, I really want to thank you for your attention. You're so attentive. Everybody have a word? I'm sorry you couldn't be here, but I'm glad that you're sort of here. And I don't know, there's ways to get signed books, even if you're not here. Are there still ways to get signed books from Baker?
You can go on the website, request one, we'll ask you for a book plate.
Yeah, so if you order from bakerbookhouse.com, you get free shipping. And you can probably get it signed. Probably.
We'll work on it.
We'll work on it. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to make my way. Reintroduce yourself. Having spent years, I probably met some of you before, but don't feel bad if I'm getting older. Oh, here's the posters too. And this is not my book. Okay. Oh, you want to take me off this?